I never expected to inherit anything from my great-uncle Samuel Torres. We barely spoke during family gatherings, and he seemed like a gruff old man who preferred the company of his chickens to people. The last time I had any meaningful interaction with him was when I was 10 years old, nearly 22 years ago. My name is Michael Torres, and at 32, I'm what you might charitably call a work in progress. 6 months ago, I was a mechanical engineer at Patterson Manufacturing, pulling down 65,000 a year and feeling pretty good about my future. Then the plant closed, another casualty of overseas competition, and suddenly I found myself joining the ranks of the unemployed with $80,000 in student loan debt hanging over my head like a storm cloud. That storm got a lot darker 3 weeks ago when my girlfriend, Sarah, packed her bags and moved out of our Pittsburgh apartment. Can't say I blamed her. Living with a man who spends his days scrolling through job listings and his nights staring at the ceiling isn't exactly the American dream she'd signed up for. Now I'm stuck with a lease I can barely afford and the kind of silence that makes you question every decision you've ever made. But the real weight on my shoulders isn't my own problems. It's my sister Anna, 28 years old and carrying scars from her 3 tours in Afghanistan that no Purple Heart could ever heal. The doctors call it severe PTSD, but that clinical term doesn't capture the way she jumps at sudden sounds or the nightmares that wake her up screaming. The private treatment facility in Harrisburg is helping slowly, but the monthly cost of $12,000 might as well be $12 million for someone in my position. Anna's my responsibility now. Has been since our parents died in that car crash when she was 16 and I was 20. Samuel came to the funeral, I remember that much. Stood in the back, wearing an old black suit that had seen better decades, nodding respectfully, but keeping his distance from the rest of the family. Even then, there was something different about him, something that set him apart from our other relatives. The memory that stays with me most clearly happened the day before the funeral. I was sitting alone in our garage, overwhelmed by the sudden weight of becoming Anna's guardian when Samuel appeared in the doorway. He didn't offer empty condolences or meaningless platitudes. Instead, he rolled up his sleeves and helped me fix the carburetor on Dad's old Chevy pickup, the one that had been giving us trouble for months. His hands were weathered and scarred, but they moved with the confidence of someone who understood machinery at a fundamental level. As we worked together in comfortable silence, he taught me things about engines that no textbook had ever explained. How to listen for the subtle changes in sound that meant trouble was coming. How to feel for the slight vibrations that indicated a component was wearing out. How to trust your instincts when the diagnostics told you one thing, but your experience suggested another. Before he left that day, Samuel pressed something into my palm. A small piece of metal, roughly 3 inches long with an irregular shape that seemed purposeful rather than random. One end had been worked into a small hook, while the other bore what looked like a series of tiny notches. He closed my fingers around it and looked me straight in the eyes. The real value of things isn't always visible on the surface, Michael. Sometimes what looks worthless to most people is priceless to those who understand what they're looking at. Keep this safe. One day you might understand why. I kept that piece of metal all these years, carrying it on my keychain like some kind of talisman. During college, through my first job, through the good times with Sarah and the bad times that followed, I couldn't say exactly why it felt so important to hold on to, but somehow I knew throwing it away would be like discarding the last connection I had to a man who, despite our lack of regular contact, had shown me more genuine care in one afternoon than most people manage in a lifetime. So when the phone rang last Tuesday morning and a lawyer named Benjamin Hayes told me that Samuel Torres had passed away and left me his entire farm, I was stunned into silence. The property sat on 50 acres of what used to be prime farmland in western Pennsylvania, about 2 hours east of Pittsburgh. According to Mr. Hayes, the house needed work. The barn was falling apart, and scattered around the property were pieces of old farm equipment that probably hadn't run since the Carter administration. There's something else you should know, Mr. Torres, the lawyer had added in a tone that suggested he was reading directly from Samuel's will. Your uncle modified his testament just 3 months before his passing. He was quite specific that the property should go to you and no one else, with particular emphasis that you should investigate everything thoroughly before making any decisions about its future. That detail struck me as odd. Why would Samuel suddenly decide to leave everything to me? We hadn't spoken in years. I'd sent Christmas cards and received the occasional birthday check when I was younger, but there was no close relationship there. It made no sense unless Samuel knew something I didn't. The timing couldn't have been better even if it came wrapped in the confusion of his unexpected death. I was facing eviction from my apartment. In 6 weeks, Anna's treatment facility was demanding payment for the next 3 months up front, and my job prospects were looking about as promising as a screen door on a submarine. The real estate market was decent, and Hayes mentioned that several local farmers had already expressed interest in purchasing the land. I could probably sell it, pay off my student loans, cover Anna's treatment for the next year, and maybe even have enough left over for a fresh start somewhere else. I drove out to the farm on a Saturday morning in late September, keys jangling in my pocket, unsure what I was going to find. The 2-hour drive from Pittsburgh took me through increasingly rural landscapes past small towns that looked like they'd been frozen in time somewhere around 1985. When I finally turned onto the gravel road that led to Samuel's property, I felt like I was driving into a different era entirely. The farmhouse was a 2-story wooden structure that had probably been white once but had faded to the color of old bone. The wraparound porch sagged slightly on one side and several shutters hung at odd angles, but the basic structure looked solid enough. Morning light filtered through ancient oak trees, casting dappled shadows across a yard that was more weeds than grass. The air smelled clean in a way that city air never does, filled with the scent of earth and growing things, and the kind of silence that makes you aware of your own breathing. As I got out of my car and stood there taking it all in, something about the place spoke to me. Maybe it was the way the land rolled gently away from the house, creating a natural viewpoint over the surrounding countryside. Maybe it was the peace of it, punctuated only by bird songs and the rustling of leaves in the breeze. Whatever it was, I found myself surprisingly reluctant to immediately call a real estate agent. The red barn leaned slightly to one side, its once bright paint faded to the color of dried blood. Farm equipment in various states of decay dotted the property like sleeping metal beasts. And there, under the massive oak tree where I'd expected to find it based on my childhood memory, sat the old John Deere tractor. It was even more deteriorated than I remembered, covered in rust and weeds, looking for all the world like something that belonged in a scrapyard rather than a working farm. As I walked toward the house, the screen door opened and a small Hispanic woman stepped onto the porch. She was probably in her early 60s with silver-streaked black hair pulled into a neat bun and weathered hands that spoke of decades of hard work. Despite her small stature, she carried herself with a dignity that commanded immediate respect. "You must be Michael," she said, her voice carrying only the slightest trace of an accent. "I'm Rosa Martinez. I looked after your uncle for the past 30 years. I shook her hand, surprised by the strength of her grip. "I didn't know Uncle Samuel had help around the place." "Not help," she corrected with a slight smile. "Friend." Samuel was not the type of man who admitted he needed help even when he did. I came 3 times a week to cook, clean, and make sure he hadn't fallen and broken his stubborn neck. I liked her immediately. There was a directness to her manner that was refreshing after months of dealing with lawyers and bill collectors and potential employers who spoke in euphemisms and corporate doublespeak. "Did you know he left me the farm?" I asked. Rosa nodded. "He told me 3 months ago, right after he changed his will. Come inside, mijo. I've made coffee. The house is yours now, but I took the liberty of cleaning it before you arrived. Samuel would have wanted it to look its best for you." The interior of the farmhouse was surprisingly well maintained compared to the exterior. Wide plank floors had been recently polished, and though the furniture was old, it was clean and sturdy. The kitchen had been modernized at some point in the 1990s with solid, if dated, appliances. Rosa poured coffee into 2 thick ceramic mugs and gestured for me to sit at a large oak table that looked like it had hosted a century of family meals. "Samuel was a complicated man," she said as she joined me. "Not good at showing affection or explaining himself, but he kept track of you over the years." This surprised me more than anything she could have said. He did. Rosa rose and went to a drawer, pulling out a manila folder. Inside were newspaper clippings about engineering competitions I'd won in college, a copy of my graduation announcement, even a printout of an article from an industry magazine that had mentioned a pump design I'd helped develop at Patterson Manufacturing. I stared at the collection, feeling something shift inside my chest. Samuel had been following my career from a distance all this time without ever reaching out. Every achievement, every milestone carefully preserved in a folder that showed more pride in my accomplishments than my own parents had ever expressed. Why didn't he ever contact me? I asked, my voice rougher than I'd intended. Rosa shrugged. Pride, perhaps, or fear of rejection. By the time he realized he wanted a relationship with his family, he'd spent so many years pushing everyone away that he didn't know how to bridge that gap. But he never stopped caring, Michael. Never stopped hoping that someday you might need him the way he needed you. I spent the morning exploring the house with Rosa as my guide. Samuel had been an engineer before becoming a farmer, she explained, which accounted for the numerous modifications throughout the property. He designed his own heating system, installed an ingenious water filtration setup that turned well water into something cleaner than what came out of most city taps, and modified most of the farm equipment to suit his specific needs. He was brilliant, Rosa said, as we examined a workshop filled with tools I'd never seen before. But not good with people. Machines were easier for him to understand. They didn't have hidden motives or complicated emotions. You fix them, they work. You maintain them properly, they last. People were never that simple for Samuel. After lunch, Rosa mentioned she needed to leave for a doctor's appointment, but would return the next day if I was planning to stay overnight. I told her I'd brought a sleeping bag and would likely spend at least one night to get a proper feel for the place. As she was preparing to leave, the sound of a pickup truck coming up the gravel drive made both of us look toward the window. A lean, weathered man in his early 60s got out of a battered Ford F-150 and approached the house. He wore faded jeans, work boots, and a flannel shirt. Despite the warm afternoon, his face tanned and creased from years of outdoor work. His eyes were sharp and assessing as they took in the property and settled on me with undisguised interest. "You must be Samuel's great-nephew," he said, extending a calloused hand. "Name's Thomas Mitchell. I've been farming the land next door for nearly 30 years. Sorry for your loss." Samuel was a good neighbor, mostly kept to himself, but never caused any trouble. We shook hands and made small talk about the property, but I noticed Rosa's expression had cooled considerably when Thomas arrived. She excused herself shortly after giving me a meaningful look that I couldn't quite interpret, but that felt like a warning. Thomas offered to show me around the property lines, pointing out where Samuel's land ended and his began. As we walked, he made casual conversation about farming challenges, property values, and the changing nature of rural communities. He seemed knowledgeable about the area and friendly enough, but there was something calculating in the way he looked at things, like he was taking inventory rather than just making conversation. After showing me various landmarks and boundary markers, Thomas's demeanor shifted slightly. He got that look people get when they're about to make a business proposition, and I braced myself for what I suspected was coming. "Listen," he said, kicking at a clump of dirt, "I've been thinking about expanding my operation for a while now. Your uncle's land would be perfect for what I have in mind. I'd be willing to make you a fair offer for the whole property, save you the trouble of dealing with all this." He gestured broadly at the dilapidated outbuildings and overgrown fields, his tone suggesting that the farm was more burden than blessing. I told him I appreciated the offer, but needed time to think things through. I was still processing the fact that I owned 50 acres of land, let alone deciding what to do with it. "Of course, take your time," Thomas said, but then he pointed toward the old John Deere tractor I'd noticed earlier. "But let me throw in something extra to sweeten the deal. See that old tractor over there? That thing's been sitting there for at least 15 years. Engine seized, tires, or rotted transmission shot. It's basically scrap metal at this point." I looked over at the tractor. It was indeed in rough shape, with weeds growing up around the wheels and rust eating away at every exposed metal surface. But something in my engineer's brain recognized it as a John Deere 4020, a model that had been considered the gold standard of tractors in its day. "Take the tractor," Thomas continued with a laugh that sounded forced. "It's worthless anyway. I'll have it hauled off your property for free as part of the deal. Save you the trouble and expense of getting rid of it yourself. Hell, I'll even throw in an extra 1,000 for your inconvenience. What do you say?" There was something about the way he said it that struck me as odd. Maybe he was too enthusiastic about disposing of something he claimed was worthless. Maybe it was the way his gaze lingered on the machine with what looked almost like hunger. Or maybe it was just the memory of my father's voice teaching me to be suspicious whenever someone tried too hard to convince me that something had no value. I told Thomas I'd consider his offer, and get back to him in a few days. As he drove away in his pickup truck, I couldn't help but notice how his eyes kept drifting back to that old tractor in his rearview mirror. That afternoon, I found myself walking back over to the John Deere. Up close, it was even more deteriorated than it had appeared from a distance. The green paint had faded and peeled away, leaving patches of bare metal that had rusted to a deep orange-brown. The seat was cracked and splitting with stuffing, poking out like cotton from an old pillow. I ran my hand along the hood, my mind automatically cataloging what would be needed to restore it. New tires, obviously, engine rebuild, transmission work, hydraulics overhaul. It would be a massive undertaking, but I couldn't deny that the challenge appealed to the engineer in me. I tried to open the hood to look at the engine, but the latch was rusted shut. The doors to the cab were similarly stuck. Everything about this machine screamed abandonment and neglect. But still, Thomas's eagerness to dismiss it as worthless had planted a seed of curiosity in my mind, and I've learned over the years that curiosity is often the first sign that something interesting is about to happen. I walked back to my car and grabbed the toolbox I'd brought along, thinking that if nothing else, I could at least take a look at what I was dealing with before making any decisions about Thomas's offer. The latch finally gave way after liberal application of WD-40 and some gentle persuasion with a hammer. When I lifted the hood, I was surprised by what I found. Yes, the engine was obviously seized and covered in rust, but everything was still there. No parts had been stripped, which was unusual for farm equipment that had sat neglected for so long. In many cases, parts alone from these old tractors could be worth hundreds of dollars to collectors and restorers. I worked my way methodically around the tractor, checking various components. The cab door took more effort to open, but eventually I managed to pry it apart. The interior was a mess of torn upholstery and rusted metal, but again I could see that the bones of a quality machine were still there. Something was odd, though. Looking more closely at some of the modifications, I realized they weren't the result of neglect or damage. They were intentional changes made by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The fuel tank in particular had been modified in a way that seemed unnecessary for normal tractor operation. I suddenly remembered the small metal piece Samuel had given me all those years ago. On a hunch, I pulled out my keychain, where I still carried it after more than 2 decades. The piece was about 3 inches long with that odd asymmetrical shape and the small hook at one end. I'd always assumed it was just a piece of scrap that Samuel had fashioned into an impromptu gift for a child. But now, looking at the modified fuel tank, I wondered if it might have a specific purpose. I climbed up into the tractor's cab and examined the fuel tank more closely. It was located under the seat, and accessing it required removing several rusted bolts. The work was slow going with my limited tools, but my curiosity was piqued in a way it hadn't been since I was a kid taking apart radios to see how they worked. When I finally got the access panel off and peered into the fuel tank, I expected to find either empty space or old gummed-up gasoline. What I found instead made me sit back on my heels in complete surprise. The tank wasn't empty, and it wasn't full of old gas either. Instead, there was something wrapped in what looked like oiled canvas, something that definitely wasn't supposed to be in a fuel tank. My heart started beating faster as I realized I might have stumbled onto something significant. I carefully extracted the package, which was heavier than I expected, and about the size of a shoebox wrapped in canvas that had been treated with oil or wax to make it waterproof. I carried it over to Samuel's workbench and carefully untied the cord that held the wrapping closed. As I peeled back the layers of protective material, my breath caught in my throat. Inside were stacks of bills, not just any bills, but crisp, clean currency that looked like it had been stored in a bank vault. Most of it was in hundreds, but there were also 50s and 20s, all bound with rubber bands that had somehow survived decades of storage. But that wasn't even the most interesting part. Mixed in with the more common bills were notes that I didn't immediately recognize. They looked older, with different designs and what appeared to be higher denominations. Some were clearly from decades past, and others looked like they might be even older than that. I carefully separated the money into different piles, trying to get a sense of what I was dealing with. The newer bills alone added up to nearly $30,000, but it was the older currency that really caught my attention. I wasn't an expert on collectible money, but I knew enough to recognize that some of these bills might be worth considerably more than their face value. There were also some papers tucked in with the money. They appeared to be documents of some kind, though they were written in Samuel's spidery handwriting and would require careful study to decipher. One page had what looked like a crude map of the farm with several locations marked with small X's. As I sat in that old workshop surrounded by stacks of money that had been hidden for who knows how long, I began to understand why Thomas Mitchell had been so eager to haul away that worthless tractor. Somehow he must have known about this cash, or at least suspected it existed. But there was something else, something that made my hands shake slightly as I held Samuel's handwritten note. At the bottom of the page in his careful script were the words that would change everything, Michael. This is just the beginning. There are 6 more places where I've left pieces of the puzzle. Find them all and you'll understand why your parents really died and why I've spent 30 years preparing for you to take my place. The metal key I gave you was always meant for more than just this old tractor. Some inheritances come with responsibilities that go far beyond money. Trust Rosa, but trust no one else until you know the whole truth. The people who killed your mother and father are still out there, and they've been watching you longer than you know. I read the note 3 times before the full meaning sank in. My parents hadn't died in a random car accident when I was 20. They'd been murdered. And Samuel, the uncle I barely knew, had spent 3 decades preparing me for something I didn't yet understand. The worthless tractor had been anything but worthless. It had been the first breadcrumb on a trail that Samuel had carefully laid out, knowing that someday I would follow it. And now, with $30,000 in cash sitting on the workbench in front of me, and a map showing 6 more hiding places scattered across the property, I realized that my inheritance was far more complicated and dangerous than I'd ever imagined. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the farm. Somewhere out there were answers to questions I'd never known to ask, and people who had killed once and might be willing to kill again to keep their secrets buried. I carefully rewrapped the money and documents, my mind racing with possibilities and fears in equal measure. Whatever Samuel had gotten himself into, whatever he'd discovered about my parents' death, I was now part of it, whether I wanted to be or not. The question was whether I had the courage to see it through to the end, no matter where that trail might lead. I spent that first night in Samuel's house, reading and rereading his handwritten note until my eyes burned. The implications hit me like a physical blow each time I processed them. My parents hadn't died in some random accident on a rainy highway outside Harrisburg. They'd been murdered, and the man I'd barely known had spent 30 years of his life preparing for me to uncover the truth. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by dreams of my mother's laugh and my father's hands teaching me to change a tire. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that twisted wreckage from 22 years ago, but now it looked different, more deliberate, more planned. I was up before dawn, pacing the kitchen with my 3rd cup of coffee when my phone rang. Anna's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment my heart stopped. Calls from the treatment facility at this hour usually meant bad news. Michael. Her voice sounded small and far away the way it did during her worst episodes. Anna, what's wrong? Are you okay? I had another nightmare, the worst one yet. But that's not why I'm calling. She paused and I could hear her struggling to find words. I keep thinking about what you said yesterday, about Uncle Samuel's farm and maybe selling it to pay for my treatment. Anna, don't worry about the money. We'll figure something out. No, listen to me. I've been thinking about him, about that day at Mom and Dad's funeral when he helped you fix the truck. Do you remember what he said to you? I remembered the moment she was referring to, though I'd never told her about it. Samuel pulling me aside after the service, his weathered hands steady on my shoulders. He said grief makes people do stupid things, but it also makes them see clearly sometimes. Things they missed when they were distracted by the business of living. There was something else, Michael, something he said to me that day that I never told you about. My coffee cup froze halfway to my lips. He asked me if I remembered anything unusual about the accident, about Mom and Dad's car. I was 16 and traumatized, so I told him no. But he said something that stuck with me all these years. He said sometimes accidents aren't accidents, and if I ever remembered anything at all, I should tell you when I was ready. The phone felt heavy in my hand. Anna, what are you trying to tell me? I think I'm ready now. Michael, and I think maybe Uncle Samuel left you that farm for a reason that has nothing to do with money. Before I could respond, there was a commotion in the background. Raised voices, someone calling Anna's name. I have to go. Group therapy starts early today, But Michael, be careful. And whatever Uncle Samuel left for you to find, I think you're supposed to find it. The line went dead, leaving me standing in Samuel's kitchen with more questions than answers, and a growing certainty that my quiet weekend of property evaluation had turned into something far more dangerous. Rosa arrived at 8:30 sharp, carrying a basket of fresh eggs and wearing an expression that suggested she'd spent the night worrying. "You look terrible, mijo. Did you sleep at all?" "Not much," I admitted. "Rosa, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." She set down the eggs and studied my face with those sharp eyes that seemed to see everything. "Samuel left me a note, hidden with some money in the old tractor. He said my parents didn't die in an accident. He said they were murdered." Rosa's face went very still. After a long moment, she nodded slowly. "I wondered when you would find that. Samuel said you would eventually, that you had the same curiosity that got your father into trouble. You knew not everything, but enough to know that Samuel spent the last 30 years of his life afraid. Afraid they would come back. Afraid they would realize he knew what they had done." "Who are they, Rosa?" Before she could answer, the sound of tires on gravel made us both turn toward the window. A dark sedan was coming up the drive, moving faster than Thomas Mitchell's casual visit the day before. Rosa grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "That car. I've seen it before. Twice in the past month, driving slowly past the farm." Samuel saw it too. It made him very nervous. The sedan pulled up near the house and two people got out. A woman in her early 40s with short dark hair and the kind of confident posture that suggested military or law enforcement training. She wore jeans and a leather jacket, but something about the way she moved reminded me of the combat veterans I'd known at Patterson Manufacturing. The man with her was older, maybe 60, wearing a dark suit that looked expensive but lived in. His gray hair was cut short, and he scanned the property with the systematic thoroughness of someone trained in threat assessment. Rosa stepped back from the window. "I don't know them, but Samuel always said strangers asking questions about family were never really strangers." The woman knocked on the front door, three firm raps that echoed through the house. "Mr. Torres, my name is Jessica Parker. I need to speak with you about your Uncle Samuel and your parents' death. It's urgent, and you may be in danger." I looked at Rosa, who nodded grimly. "Samuel said when this day came, you would have to decide whether to trust your instincts or run away. But he also said you were too much like your father to run." I opened the door, keeping the chain latch engaged. Jessica Parker stood close enough that I could see the intensity in her green eyes and the way her left hand rested near what was probably a concealed weapon. "How do you know about my parents?" "Because my father died with them, Mr. Torres. And the same people who killed our parents have been watching you and this farm for 30 years, waiting for Samuel to make a mistake." The man beside her stepped forward. "My name is Dr. Richard Coleman. I worked with your uncle on a classified project in the late 1960s, a project that got people killed when some of us tried to expose what was really happening." I unlatched the chain and opened the door. "You'd better come inside." Jessica Parker moved into the house with the fluid grace of someone comfortable with violence, while Richard Coleman followed more slowly, his eyes taking in details the way Samuel used to when he was studying a broken machine. Rosa poured coffee without being asked, setting out cups with the efficiency of someone who had served unexpected guests before. As we gathered around Samuel's kitchen table, Jessica pulled out a manila folder, thick with documents and photographs. Brown. "Torres, what has Samuel told you about his work before he became a farmer?" "Nothing specific. Rosa mentioned he was an engineer, but he never talked about his past." Jessica opened the folder and spread several black and white photographs across the table. One showed a group of men in suits standing in front of what appeared to be a military installation. I recognized Samuel immediately, looking 30 years younger, but with the same intense eyes. This was taken in 1969 at a classified facility in Nevada. The project was called Meridian, supposedly focused on developing advanced energy systems for military applications. Your uncle was one of the lead engineers, along with my father, David Parker, and Dr. Coleman here. Richard Coleman leaned forward. "What we discovered during that project changed everything we thought we knew about physics and energy production. We developed a system capable of extracting enormous amounts of power from what most people would consider empty space itself." "That sounds like science fiction," I said. "So did nuclear weapons in 1930, Jessica replied. "The technology was real, Mr. Torres, and it worked. But when we realized what the defense contractor was planning to do with it, some of us tried to shut the project down." The defense contractor was Meridian Defense Corporation, Coleman continued, run by a man named Victor Blackwood, who saw the potential for weaponizing our energy system. We're talking about directed energy weapons, more powerful than anything in existence, capable of destroying entire city blocks without leaving radioactive residue. I looked at the photographs again, trying to reconcile the young Samuel in these images with the reclusive farmer I'd known. What does this have to do with my parents? Jessica's expression hardened. Your father was Samuel's younger brother, and Samuel made the mistake of confiding in him about what we discovered. When Meridian realized there was a security breach, they decided to eliminate everyone who posed a threat. My father was killed first, Coleman said quietly, made to look like a heart attack, but we knew better. Then they came after Samuel, but he'd already gone into hiding here on the farm. And my parents, they were collateral damage, Jessica said, her voice tight with old anger. Meridian couldn't be sure how much Samuel had told your father, so they arranged an accident. Made it look random, untraceable. I felt the room spinning slightly as the full implications hit me. You're telling me my parents died because of something Samuel was involved in decades ago? We're telling you they died because they posed a threat to people who had invested too much money and power in a weapon system that should never have been built, Coleman replied. Jessica reached into her folder and pulled out a more recent photograph. It showed a man in his 50s with silver hair and cold eyes standing next to what appeared to be a massive industrial complex. This is Edward Blackwood, Victor's son. He runs Meridian Defense now, and he's been waiting 30 years for Samuel to make a mistake, to leave behind evidence that could expose what his father did. Rosa, who had been silent through this entire exchange, finally spoke up. Samuel said the evidence was scattered, hidden in places where only someone who knew him well could find it. Jessica nodded. That's why you're in danger now, Mr. Torres. Meridian knows Samuel is dead, and they know he left everything to you. They'll assume he passed on what he knew. As if summoned by her words, my phone began buzzing with an incoming call. The number was local, but I didn't recognize it. Answer it, Jessica said, but put it on speaker. I swiped to accept the call. Mr. Torres, this is Sheriff Diana Harper from the County Sheriff's Department. I need you to come down to the station immediately. There's been a development regarding your uncle's death. What kind of development? I'd prefer not to discuss it over the phone. Can you be here within the hour? I looked at Jessica, who was shaking her head vigorously. I'm dealing with some property issues right now, Sheriff. Could we schedule something for tomorrow, Mr. Torres? This really can't wait. We've received some concerning information about activities on your uncle's property. It would be in your best interest to come in voluntarily. The implied threat was unmistakable. I'll be there as soon as I can, I said, ending the call. Jessica was already standing. That wasn't a request, Mr. Torres. That was a warning. Meridian has people everywhere, including local law enforcement. Coleman nodded grimly. Sheriff Harper was recruited 3 years ago. Her predecessor asked too many questions about certain federal activities in the county and decided to take early retirement. How do you know all this? Because I never stopped investigating, Coleman replied. Even after they forced me out of the program, I kept gathering evidence, building a case that could someday bring down Meridian and everyone connected to them. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device that looked like a modified cell phone. This contains 30 years of documentation, financial records, personnel files, technical specifications, recorded conversations, everything needed to prove what Meridian did to our families and hundreds of other people who got in their way. Jessica moved to the window and peered out through the curtains. We need to move. Now, there's another vehicle coming up the drive. Through the kitchen window, I could see a white panel van moving slowly toward the house, its windows tinted dark enough to hide whoever was inside. Rosa grabbed a canvas bag from beside the stove. Samuel prepared for this day, she said, stuffing the bag with supplies. There's a root cellar behind the barn, with a tunnel that leads to the old creek bed. He showed me the route in case this ever happened. The van stopped about 50 yards from the house, and 3 men in dark clothing got out. They moved with military precision, spreading out to cover different angles of approach. Jessica drew a pistol from under her jacket. Mr. Torres, you have about 30 seconds to decide whether you are coming with us or staying here to answer their questions about your uncle's activities. I thought about Anna, about the treatment she needed and the money that was supposed to pay for it. I thought about the note Samuel had left me and the promise to explain why my parents had really died. I'm coming with you. We slipped out the back door as the first of the men reached the front porch. Rosa led us across the yard at a half-crouch using the outbuildings for cover. Behind us, I heard the sharp crack of wood splintering as they forced their way into Samuel's house. The root cellar was hidden beneath a false floor in the old tool shed. Rosa pulled up the boards to reveal a narrow ladder descending into darkness. This tunnel was built during Prohibition, she explained as we climbed down. Samuel reinforced it and added ventilation. It comes out near the creek about half a mile from here. The tunnel was cramped and damp, forcing us to move in single file through passages that felt like they'd been carved from solid earth. Coleman, despite his age, kept pace without complaint, while Jessica brought up the rear, occasionally stopping to listen for sounds of pursuit. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, we emerged into daylight beside a creek that gurgled softly through a stand of pine trees. Jessica's sedan was parked on a logging road just beyond the tree line. As we drove away from Samuel's farm, I watched in the side mirror as smoke began rising from the direction of the house. They weren't just searching the property. They were destroying evidence. "Where are we going?" I asked. "Pittsburgh," Jessica replied. "There's someone you need to meet, someone who can help us understand what Samuel really left behind." Coleman turned in his seat to face me. "Mr. Torres, I need you to understand something. The device I'm carrying contains enough evidence to bring down Meridian Defense and expose a conspiracy that reaches into the highest levels of government. But it's encrypted, and the decryption key is something only Samuel knew." "What kind of key?" "Something personal, something that meant enough to him that he would never forget it, but obscure enough that Meridian could never guess it." I thought about the metal piece on my keychain, about the childhood memory of Samuel teaching me to fix engines, about the way he looked at me when he pressed that odd-shaped key into my palm. "I might know what you're looking for," I said quietly. As we drove toward Pittsburgh, leaving behind the burning remains of Samuel's peaceful farm, I realized that my inheritance had become something far more dangerous and important than I'd ever imagined. Whatever Samuel had hidden on that property, whatever secrets he'd spent 30 years protecting, I was now the keeper of that legacy. And somewhere behind us, people with unlimited resources and no moral constraints were already planning their next move to make sure those secrets stayed buried forever. The worthless tractor had been just the beginning. Now I had to decide whether I was brave enough to follow Samuel's trail to wherever it led, no matter what the cost might be. Anna was counting on me to find the money for her treatment. But now I understood that some things were worth more than money, and some debts could only be paid with the truth. The drive to Pittsburgh felt like descending into a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Jessica kept the speedometer buried while Coleman worked frantically on his encrypted device, occasionally cursing when another layer of Samuel's security protocols blocked his progress. I was staring out the window at the industrial landscape when my phone rang. Anna's number, but when I answered, her voice sounded different, smaller, terrified. "Michael, they took me." "What, Anna? Where are you?" "I don't know. Some kind of medical transport van. The men at the facility, they weren't really federal agents. They had fake badges, but Dr. Martinez tried to stop them, and they just pushed him aside." My hands started shaking. "Are you hurt?" "Not yet. But Michael, they keep asking about Uncle Samuel, about whether you found anything at the farm. They seem to think I know something about some kind of project." Jessica grabbed the phone from me. "Anna, this is Jessica Parker. I need you to stay calm and tell me everything you can see around you." "I'm in the back of a van, medical equipment everywhere. 2 men up front, both armed. We're driving on a highway, but I can't see any signs. Can you tell what direction you are heading? The sun is on my left, so we're going north, I think." "Anna, listen carefully. We're coming for you, but I need you to be smart about this. If you get any chance to signal for help or escape, take it. These people are extremely dangerous." "I understand." The line went dead. Coleman looked up from his device with grim satisfaction. "I've cracked the first layer of encryption. Michael, your uncle wasn't just collecting evidence. He was documenting something called the M7 project. And according to these files, Meridian needs specific genetic markers from the original engineering team to activate their weapon system." "What kind of genetic markers?" "DNA from direct descendants of the engineers who worked on the project. Your father's DNA, your DNA. The implications hit me like a physical blow. They don't just want the evidence. They need me alive to make their weapon work." Jessica nodded grimly. "That changes everything. They won't kill you, but they'll do anything to control you, including using Anna as leverage. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Mr. Torres, I have your sister. She's safe for now, but her continued well-being depends entirely on your cooperation. There's an abandoned warehouse complex in Hazelwood. Building 7, loading dock 3. Come alone in 2 hours and bring everything your uncle left you. Any attempt to involve law enforcement will result in complications for Anna's medical treatment. The message included a photo of Anna sitting in what looked like a medical chair, electrodes attached to her temples. Her eyes were closed, but I could see her chest rising and falling steadily. They're going to experiment on her, I realized, my voice breaking. Coleman was typing rapidly. According to these files, Meridian has been developing something called neural interface technology. They can extract memories directly from a subject's brain, but the process is extremely dangerous. Severe PTSD cases like Anna's are particularly vulnerable to permanent psychological damage. Jessica pulled into a gas station and parked away from the pumps. We need help. Real help. I'm calling my contact at the FBI. No, I said quickly. The message said no law enforcement. Michael, we can't handle this alone. Meridian has resources, trained operatives, advanced technology. We're 3 people with good intentions and limited firepower. Before I could argue, my phone rang again. This time it was Rosa. Mijo, they came back to the farm. With machines, big machines. Rosa, are you safe? Where are you? I'm hiding in the old storm cellar Samuel built during the Cold War. But Michael, they're not just searching anymore. They're digging. With excavators and ground-penetrating radar. They know about the other hiding places, I realized. Rosa's voice became urgent. There's something Samuel never told you. Something he made me promise to keep secret until you found the first cache. What is it, the genetic lock he installed on the M7 system? It doesn't just need your DNA, Mijo. It needs you alive and conscious to provide continuous biometric confirmation. That's why they can't just kill you and extract what they need. But there's more. Samuel built a fail-safe into his modifications. If the system detects his DNA signature, it will shut down permanently. Self-destruct, he called it. I don't understand. Before Samuel went into hiding, he made sure some of his genetic material was incorporated into the weapon's core programming. But Michael, you carry his genetic markers too. Your family, if you can get close enough to the M7 system and provide the right biometric confirmation, you can destroy it. The line crackled with interference. Rosa, are you still there? I'm here, but they found the storm cellar. I can hear voices above me. Michael, Samuel left one more thing for you, something he never put in the notes or hiding places. What is it? The location of Meridian's primary M7 facility. It's not in Nevada like the old project. It's here in Pennsylvania, built inside an abandoned steel mill along the Monongahela River. That's where they've taken Anna. That's where you have to go. Rosa, get out of there. Run. Too late, Mijo. But remember what Samuel always said. Sometimes the most important battles are fought by people who never expected to be soldiers. The line went dead. Jessica stared at me with a mixture of admiration and concern. Your uncle's housekeeper just gave us intelligence that most federal agencies would kill for. Coleman was already plotting coordinates on his device. The steel mill is 12 miles from here. If Rosa is right, that's where they're holding Anna and where they've relocated their primary M7 testing facility. We sat in silence for a moment, processing the magnitude of what we were facing. So let me understand this, I said finally. Meridian has built a weapon that can level entire cities. They need my DNA to make it work. They have my sister as leverage to force my cooperation. And the only way to stop them is for me to get close enough to their weapon to activate Samuel's failsafe, which may or may not work. That's about the size of it, Jessica confirmed. And if Samuel's failsafe doesn't work, then Meridian has an operational weapon system capable of destroying any target on Earth, Coleman said quietly. And they have a genetic key, willing or unwilling, to activate it whenever they choose. I thought about Anna, probably terrified and confused, being used as a pawn in a game that started before either of us was born. I thought about my parents murdered for knowing too little about something that was now demanding everything I had to give. I also thought about Samuel spending 30 years in hiding, preparing for a moment when someone in his family would have to stand up and finish what he'd started. All right, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. What's the plan? Jessica spread a map across the hood of her car. The steel mill complex covers about 40 acres along the river. Multiple buildings, limited access points, perfect for keeping unwanted visitors out. Or for keeping people trapped inside, Coleman added grimly. Jessica traced several routes with her finger. We approach from 3 directions. Michael, you go in the front entrance, as they expect. Coleman and I will infiltrate from the riverside and try to locate both Anna and the M7 facility. What if it's a trap? It's definitely a trap, Jessica replied. The question is whether we can turn it to our advantage. Coleman held up his device. I've managed to decode more of Samuel's files. The M7 system requires a warm-up period of approximately 30 minutes before it reaches full operational capacity. If we can create enough chaos during that window, you might be able to get close enough to activate the failsafe. And if I can't, Coleman's expression was grim, then Anna won't be the only casualty. According to these specifications, a fully operational M7 system could level downtown Pittsburgh in less than 10 seconds. The weight of that responsibility settled on my shoulders like a physical burden. Hundreds of thousands of lives, depending on whether I could summon the courage to walk into an obvious trap and somehow emerge victorious. As we drove toward the steel mill, I found myself thinking about the metal piece Samuel had given me as a child. For 22 years, I'd carried it as a reminder of the only adult who had ever treated me with genuine respect. Now I understood it had always been more than a keepsake. It had been preparation. The abandoned Hazelwood Works loomed ahead of us in the gathering dusk, its skeletal structures silhouetted against a sky the color of old blood. Somewhere in that industrial graveyard, Anna was waiting for me to save her. Somewhere else, a weapon capable of unprecedented destruction was powering up for a demonstration that would change the world forever. Jessica dropped me at the main gate while she and Coleman continued toward their river approach. As I walked through the empty facility following spray-painted arrows that led deeper into the complex, I realized this inheritance had become something far beyond money or property. Samuel had left me a mission, a chance to right wrongs that had festered for 30 years, an opportunity to ensure that the deaths of my parents and countless others would finally mean something. The worthless tractor had been just the first step on a journey that was about to reach its most dangerous point. And for the first time since this all began, I felt ready to see it through to the end, no matter what the cost might be. Building 7 stood ahead of me in the growing darkness, its loading dock illuminated by harsh spotlights that turned the evening shadows into stark geometric patterns. Whatever waited inside, whatever Edward Blackwood had planned for me, I was done being afraid. Some inheritances, I realized, can only be claimed by people willing to fight for them. And I was finally ready to fight. Building 7's loading dock was bathed in harsh industrial lighting that turned the surrounding shadows into impenetrable black walls. As I approached the entrance, my footsteps echoed off concrete and rusted steel with a hollow sound that seemed to announce my arrival to anyone listening. Edward Blackwood stood in the center of the cavernous space, flanked by 6 men in tactical gear. But it was the figure beside him that made my blood run cold. An elderly man in a wheelchair connected to what looked like medical monitoring equipment, his silver hair disheveled and his face bearing fresh bruises. Richard Coleman. But not the Coleman who had been helping us decode Samuel's files. This man looked broken, defeated, his eyes holding the hollow stare of someone who had endured hours of interrogation. Mr. Torres Blackwood said, his voice carrying easily across the empty space. Thank you for coming. I believe you've met Dr. Coleman, though perhaps not under these circumstances. Where's Anna? I demanded. Safe for the moment. Though I'm afraid Dr. Coleman here has been less than forthcoming about the location of certain encrypted files. Perhaps you can be more cooperative. One of the tactical team members stepped forward, holding a tablet that showed surveillance footage of me finding the money in Samuel's tractor. We've been monitoring your activities since the moment you inherited that farm, Blackwood continued. Every location you've visited, every person you've spoken to, every discovery you've made. Did you really think you could outsmart an organization with unlimited resources and 30 years of experience in this particular game? I looked around the loading dock, noting the strategic positions of Blackwood's men and the various exits that were probably already covered. What do you want, Simple? Your cooperation in activating the M7 system. You see, your uncle was more clever than we initially realized. The genetic locks he installed require not just DNA verification, but continuous biometric monitoring from a living descendant of the original engineering team. That's why you kept Coleman alive. Dr. Coleman served his purpose, but his genetic markers are incomplete. We need someone with direct bloodline connection to Samuel Torres. Someone who shares his specific DNA sequence through paternal inheritance. A door opened at the far end of the loading dock, and Anna was wheeled in on a medical gurney. She was conscious but obviously sedated, electrodes attached to her temples and wrists. A woman in medical scrubs accompanied the gurney, adjusting IV lines with practiced efficiency. "As you can see, your sister is receiving excellent care," Blackwood said. "Our medical team has been running some preliminary tests on her neurological responses. PTSD cases provide fascinating insight into trauma-induced memory patterns." "You bastard. She's not part of this." "On the contrary, Mr. Torres, everyone is part of this now. You see, we've discovered something interesting about your family's genetic profile. The same markers that allow you to activate our weapon system also make you remarkably resistant to certain forms of neural extraction. Your sister, however, lacks that resistance." The woman in scrubs looked up from Anna's gurney. "We can extract her memories selectively, Mr. Blackwood. Every conversation she's had with her brother about their uncle, every detail about the farm, every piece of information Samuel might have shared with the family over the years." "And the process," Blackwood asked. "Irreversible brain damage in subjects with existing trauma conditions. She wouldn't survive the complete extraction." I took a step forward, but immediately stopped. Red laser dots appeared on my chest from multiple directions. "Here's what's going to happen, Mr. Torres. You're going to accompany us to our facility and provide the biometric authorization we need to complete the M7 testing sequence. In exchange, your sister will receive the medical care she needs and be allowed to continue her recovery at a facility of our choosing. And if I refuse, then we extract what we need from Anna's memories and dispose of both of you. The M7 system will take longer to activate without direct genetic authorization, but our technical team assures me it's possible." Before I could respond, the sound of grinding metal echoed through the loading dock. One of the large overhead doors was slowly opening, revealing a massive piece of equipment being moved into position. The M7 system itself was unlike anything I could have imagined. A cylindrical device, roughly the size of a shipping container, covered in complex geometric patterns that seemed to shift and move in the harsh lighting. Thick cables snaked from its base to multiple power sources, while arrays of sensors and monitoring equipment surrounded it like electronic sentries. "Impressive, isn't it?" Blackwood said, following my gaze. 30 years of development, $5 billion in research costs, and the accumulated genius of some of the brightest minds in theoretical physics, including my uncle. Your uncle was instrumental in the early phases, yes, but he lacked vision, Mr. Torres. He couldn't see past conventional applications to the true potential of unlimited energy manipulation." As the M7 system was positioned in the center of the loading dock, I noticed something that made my heart skip. A small access panel near the base marked with symbols that matched the notches on the metal piece Samuel had given me 22 years ago. The emergency shutdown Samuel had built into the system. If I could get close enough to use his key, I might be able to activate the fail-safe Rosa had described. Dr. Coleman, despite his obvious injuries, managed to speak in a voice barely above a whisper. "Michael, don't trust them. The system is set to overload if activated without proper safety protocols. They're planning to demonstrate it on Pittsburgh's North Shore. 30,000 people live in that area." One of Blackwood's men struck Coleman with the butt of his rifle, sending him slumping forward in his wheelchair. "Dr. Coleman has been uncooperative regarding certain technical specifications," Blackwood explained. "But no matter, we have other sources of information." He gestured to one of his technicians who began connecting monitoring cables to the M7 system. "The beauty of your uncle's design is that it's essentially foolproof once activated. Point and shoot, you might say, with enough destructive potential to level a city block or an entire metropolitan area depending on the power settings." My earpiece, which I'd forgotten I was still wearing, crackled with Jessica's voice. "Michael, we've located the main power generators for the facility. Coleman and I are in position to cut power on your signal, but you need to get closer to that device." I cleared my throat to cover the sound. "How do I know you'll keep your word about Anna?" "Because, Mr. Torres, I'm a businessman, not a monster. Your sister represents no threat to my organization once this demonstration is complete. She'll be relocated to a private facility where she can continue her treatment without any memory of recent events." The technicians finished their connections and stepped back from the M7 system. Status lights began blinking in complex patterns as the device powered up with a low hum that seemed to resonate through the concrete floor. Excellent, Blackwood said, checking his watch. We're right on schedule. The North Shore target has been selected, evacuation routes have been discreetly blocked, and our international observers are in position to witness the demonstration. International observers, representatives from several governments interested in acquiring similar systems. The beauty of the M7 is its precision, Mr. Torres. No radioactive fallout, no chemical contamination, no evidence that conventional explosives were involved. The perfect weapon for the modern age. I moved slightly closer to the device, noting how the access panel was positioned just below the primary control interface. What exactly do you need me to do? Place your palm on the biometric scanner and maintain contact while the system completes its activation sequence. Approximately 15 minutes of your time, and then you and your sister are free to go. The scanner was located on the opposite side of the device from Samuel's emergency access panel. If I was going to activate the failsafe, I'd need to create some kind of distraction. That's when the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in immediately, bathing the loading dock in eerie red illumination. But the confusion was enough. I dove toward the M7 system as gunfire erupted around me, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Jessica and Coleman had cut the main power, but the M7 system continued operating on its internal power supply. I rolled behind the device, just as bullets sparked off the concrete where I'd been standing. In my earpiece, Jessica's voice was urgent. Michael, the power cut will only last about 60 seconds before their backup generators kick in. Whatever you're going to do it now. I pulled out Samuel's metal key and located the emergency access panel. The notches on the key aligned perfectly with hidden receptors in the panel face. As I turned it, the panel slid open to reveal a simple red button labeled with Samuel's initials. Emergency shutdown, just like Rosa had described. But as I reached for the button, a powerful hand grabbed my wrist. I don't think so, Mr. Torres. Edward Blackwood had somehow circled behind me during the confusion and now held a pistol pressed against the base of my skull. Your uncle was clever, I'll give him that, but not clever enough to hide his sabotage from someone who spent 30 years studying his work. He forced my hand away from the emergency button and toward the biometric scanner on the other side of the device. The demonstration will proceed as planned. Your cooperation is no longer optional. That's when Anna's voice cut through the chaos, stronger and clearer than I'd heard it since before her deployment. Hey, asshole. Blackwood turned just as Anna, having somehow freed herself from the gurney, restraint swung a medical IV pole directly into his face. The impact sent him staggering backward, blood streaming from his broken nose. I lunged for Samuel's emergency button and pressed it hard. The M7 system's hum changed pitch dramatically, rising to an almost musical tone before dropping to a subsonic vibration that seemed to shake the entire building. Status lights shifted from green to amber to flashing red as alarms began blaring throughout the facility. System overload, a computerized voice announced. Emergency shutdown in 60 seconds. All personnel evacuate immediately. Blackwood, despite his injuries, raised his pistol toward Anna. If I can't have the weapon, no one can, starting with your family. But before he could fire, Dr. Coleman, moving faster than should have been possible for a man in his condition, rammed his wheelchair into Blackwood's legs. The impact sent both men sprawling across the concrete floor. Coleman looked up at me from where he'd fallen. The failsafe will destroy the M7 system, but the energy release could bring down this entire building. You need to get Anna and get out of here now. Emergency shutdown in 30 seconds. Anna was already moving her military training, overriding whatever sedatives they'd given her. Together, we helped Coleman to his feet and began making our way toward the nearest exit as Blackwood's surviving men scattered in all directions. Jessica appeared at the loading dock entrance, providing covering fire as we escaped into the Pennsylvania night. Behind us, the abandoned steel mill was illuminating like some kind of industrial Christmas tree, every window glowing with the unstable energy discharge of the failing M7 system. We made it approximately 200 yards before the explosion. The blast wasn't the dramatic fireball I'd expected, but rather a brilliant white flash that seemed to erase color from the world for several seconds. When my vision cleared, Building 7 had simply vanished, leaving only a perfectly circular crater where Samuel's greatest creation and greatest regret had finally destroyed itself. Coleman, leaning heavily on Jessica for support, managed a weak smile. Samuel would have been proud. 30 years of planning and his fail-safe worked exactly as designed. Anna looked back at the smoking ruins. Is it over? I thought about Edward Blackwood, probably buried somewhere under tons of rubble and twisted metal. I thought about the evidence Coleman had gathered still encrypted on his device, but now backed up by the testimony of multiple witnesses. I thought about Meridian Defense Corporation, whose secret weapon program had just literally gone up in smoke. Yeah, I said, putting my arm around my sister's shoulders. It's over. But even as I said it, I knew that some endings are really just new beginnings. Samuel's inheritance hadn't just been money hidden in an old tractor. It had been the responsibility to finish what he'd started to ensure that the truth about my parents' death would finally come to light. The worthless machine had led us to something far more valuable than treasure. It had led us to justice, to family, and to the understanding that some legacies are worth fighting for no matter what the cost might be. The smoke was still rising from the crater that had been Building 7 when I heard footsteps approaching through the rubble. Jessica immediately raised her weapon, but Coleman, despite his injuries, held up a restraining hand. "Wait," he said, his voice carrying an odd note of recognition. "I know that walk." From the shadows beyond the emergency lighting, a figure emerged that made my heart stop. Tall, slightly stooped with age, but moving with the deliberate precision I remembered from my childhood. Silver hair, weathered hands, and eyes that held 30 years of careful planning. Samuel Torres, my great-uncle, very much alive. "Hello, Michael," he said, his voice exactly as I remembered it. "I'm sorry for the deception, but some secrets are too dangerous to trust to anyone until the moment they're needed." Anna stared at him in shock. "But you're supposed to be dead. The funeral, the lawyers, the inheritance." Samuel smiled, the first genuine warmth I'd seen from him in decades. "Death is remarkably easy to fake when you've had 30 years to plan it and friends in the right places. The man you buried was a homeless veteran who died of natural causes. I made sure he got a proper service and a headstone with his real name." Jessica lowered her weapon but kept it ready. "Dr. Coleman told us you'd been murdered, poisoned gradually to mimic natural causes." "That was the plan," Samuel replied. "Meridian had been slowly introducing toxins into my water supply for months, but I'd been testing everything that went into my body since 1975. When I detected the first traces of their poison, I knew it was time to implement the final phase." He looked toward the smoking crater where the M7 system had destroyed itself. "Though I must admit, I hoped it wouldn't come to this. I spent 40 years of my life trying to find a way to use that technology for good. Clean energy, medical applications, space exploration. Instead, it became exactly what I feared it would become." "You let me think you were dead," I said, anger mixing with relief in ways that made my voice shake. "I've been carrying around guilt about barely knowing you, about not being there when you passed. Do you have any idea what that felt like?" Samuel's expression softened. "Michael, that guilt is exactly why I couldn't tell you the truth until now. If you'd known I was alive, you would have tried to help me. You would have put yourself and Anna in danger years before you were ready to handle what Meridian could throw at you." Anna, still recovering from whatever medications they'd given her, managed to stand without assistance. "Ready for what? What did you think was going to happen?" Samuel reached into his jacket and pulled out a device similar to Coleman's, but clearly more advanced. "I knew that eventually Meridian would make their move. They've been planning to demonstrate the M7 system to international buyers for 2 years. Tonight was their deadline. If I hadn't acted, if you hadn't found the evidence and followed the trail I laid out, they would have successfully tested their weapon on 30,000 innocent people." He activated the device, showing us a series of satellite images. "These were taken 20 minutes ago. Federal agents are simultaneously raiding Meridian facilities in Virginia, Nevada, California, and overseas. The evidence Coleman collected, combined with the files I've been gathering for 3 decades, has given investigators enough ammunition to dismantle the entire organization." Coleman struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on his wheelchair. "Samuel, the genetic lock system. How did you know Michael would be able to activate the failsafe?" "Because I designed it specifically for him," Samuel replied. "Not just his DNA, but his personality. Michael has always been curious, stubborn, and protective of family. I knew that if the situation became desperate enough, he would do whatever was necessary to protect Anna and innocent people, even if it meant walking into obvious danger. That's why the emergency shutdown required both the key and direct physical activation. It couldn't be triggered remotely or accidentally. It required someone willing to get close enough to a live weapon to press a button that might kill them." Jessica was scanning the area with night vision equipment. "We need to move." Local authorities will be here soon, and there are still Meridian operatives unaccounted for. Actually, Samuel said, pulling out an old-fashioned pocket watch, federal agents should be arriving in approximately 3 minutes. I've been coordinating with them since I faked my death. As if summoned by his words, the sound of helicopters filled the air above us. But instead of Meridian's black aircraft, these bore the unmistakable markings of the FBI's hostage rescue team. The next several hours passed in a blur of debriefings, medical examinations, and federal agents asking the same questions in different ways. Anna was taken to a secure medical facility for evaluation, while Coleman was rushed to surgery to treat injuries that were more extensive than we'd initially realized. Samuel and I found ourselves in a federal building in downtown Pittsburgh, sitting across a conference table from Deputy Director Patricia Hayes of the FBI's Counterterrorism Division. "Mr. Torres, both of you," she said, spreading a collection of photographs across the table, "what you've accomplished here is unprecedented. Meridian Defense Corporation was one of the most sophisticated criminal organizations we've ever encountered. Their political connections, their resources, their willingness to eliminate anyone who threatened their operations." She paused at a photograph of Edward Blackwood being pulled from the rubble of Building 7 alive, but badly injured. "Mr. Blackwood is currently in federal custody, along with 23 other Meridian executives and operatives. The evidence you've provided has already led to indictments for murder, conspiracy, weapons, trafficking, and treason. What happens to the M7 technology now?" I asked. Deputy Director Hayes exchanged glances with Samuel. "The destructive applications will remain classified and hopefully forgotten. But the underlying energy generation principles, the clean applications your uncle originally envisioned, those will be released to civilian researchers under international oversight." Samuel leaned forward. "Michael, I need you to understand something. The farm isn't just your inheritance anymore. It's going to become a research facility, a place where the positive applications of this technology can be developed safely. If you're willing, I'd like you to help run it." I thought about my apartment in Pittsburgh, my mounting debts, my failed relationship with Sarah, and the job prospects that had seemed so bleak just a week ago. "What about Anna?" "She'll always have a place there," Samuel replied. "The farm is big enough for all of us. And Rosa has already volunteered to come back and help coordinate the domestic arrangements." "Rosa's alive," Samuel smiled. "She's tougher than she looks. Meridian's operatives found the storm cellar, but they didn't find the secondary tunnel system I built in the 1980s. She's been hiding out at her sister's house in Erie, waiting for the all-clear." 3 months later, I was standing in the restored barn that had once housed Samuel's worthless John Deere tractor, now converted into a state-of-the-art research laboratory. The tractor itself had been fully restored and was displayed in a place of honor, a reminder of how the most important discoveries often come from the most unexpected places. Anna was doing better than anyone had dared hope. The combination of finding closure about our parents' death, the satisfaction of playing a crucial role in stopping Meridian, and the stability of living on the farm with family had worked better than years of expensive therapy. She'd enrolled in a mechanical engineering program at Carnegie Mellon, saying she wanted to understand the technology that had shaped our family's destiny. Coleman had recovered from his injuries and accepted a position as the facility's senior technical advisor. His experience with both the original Meridian project and 30 years of independent research made him invaluable in ensuring the technology would be developed ethically. Rosa had indeed returned, bringing with her an energy and joy that made the old farmhouse feel more like a home than it ever had during my childhood. She'd taken over not just the domestic arrangements, but had also become the unofficial coordinator between our research team and the various federal oversight committees. Jessica had accepted a position with the FBI's new Emerging Technologies Division, specializing in cases involving advanced weapon systems and corporate espionage. She visited the farm regularly, ostensibly to check on our progress, but increasingly because she and I had discovered we worked well together in ways that extended beyond crisis management. Samuel, freed from 30 years of hiding and constant vigilance, had thrown himself into the research with an enthusiasm that made him seem decades younger. Watching him work alongside Anna, teaching her the same principles he'd once tried to teach me, during that long-ago afternoon in our garage, I finally understood what family legacy really meant. It wasn't about money or property or even shared blood. It was about values passed from one generation to the next, about the willingness to stand up for what's right, even when the cost seems too high to bear. On a warm evening in late spring, I was working alone in the lab when Samuel appeared in the doorway carrying 2 cups of Rose's coffee and wearing an expression I'd learned to recognize as serious conversation mode. Michael, there is something I need to tell you about your parents. I looked up from the energy conversion equations I'd been reviewing. I thought we'd covered everything. Meridian killed them because they knew too much about the project. That's true, but it's not the complete truth. Samuel sat down across from me, his weathered hands wrapped around his coffee cup. Your father didn't just accidentally learn about the M7 system. I told him about it deliberately. Why? Because I was scared and I was alone and I needed someone I could trust to help me figure out how to stop what Meridian was planning. Your father was the smartest person I knew and the most ethical. I thought if anyone could help me find a solution that didn't involve violence or destruction, it would be him. Samuel's voice grew quiet. I got him killed, Michael. I got your mother killed. I've spent 30 years trying to find a way to make that right. I set down my pen and looked at this man who had sacrificed everything to protect people he'd never met from a weapon that should never have existed. You did make it right, I said. You spent 3 decades gathering evidence, planning a strategy, and positioning all the pieces so that when the time came, Meridian could be stopped. You couldn't save our parents, but you saved thousands of other people's parents. I paused, thinking about the journey that had brought us to this moment. Besides, if you hadn't told Dad about the project, Anna and I would never have been in danger. But we also would never have been in position to stop Meridian when it mattered most. Maybe some things happen the way they're supposed to happen. Samuel smiled, and for the first time since I'd known him, it was a smile without shadows. Your father would be proud of the man you've become, Michael, and your mother would be amazed at how much you've accomplished. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the evening sounds of the farm settling around us. In the distance, I could hear Anna and Coleman discussing modifications to the energy storage system, their voices carrying the excited tones of people solving interesting problems. The worthless tractor had led us through a maze of hidden money, family secrets, and deadly conspiracies. But ultimately, it had led us home, to a place where the technology that had torn our family apart was being transformed into something that might benefit the entire world. Some inheritances, I'd learned, come with responsibilities that can't be measured in dollars or acres. Some legacies require you to risk everything to honor the sacrifice of those who came before. But when you're surrounded by family working towards something greater than yourself, those responsibilities don't feel like burdens. They feel like gifts. The last light of day was fading across the Pennsylvania hills when I walked outside to check on the restored John Deere tractor one final time. Tomorrow, a delegation of international scientists would arrive to review our progress and discuss expanding the research program. But tonight it was just family, just home, just the quiet satisfaction of work well done and problems solved together. I ran my hand along the tractor's perfectly restored green paint, thinking about the scared, unemployed engineer who had first approached this machine with nothing but curiosity and a strange metal key. Sometimes the most valuable things in life really are hidden in the most unexpected places. Sometimes what looks worthless to the world contains exactly what you need to change everything. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, an inheritance can give you not just money or property, but the chance to become the person you were always meant to be. The worthless machine had taught me that, and it was a lesson I'd carry with me for the rest of my life.